I've been noticing something about leaders, including myself. We can tell you exactly what happened: the promotion, the company we left, the business we started, the conversation we can't shake, the season that stretched us further than we expected, and the one that we'd rather forget. We remember all of it. What we can't always explain is what it was for. We tend to file important moments as separate events. This job, that season, that mistake, that win. Each one gets boxed up and set on a shelf, done and gone, waiting to be pulled back down only when someone asks about it. We can talk about the what, but rarely the why. I think most of us are sitting on more insight into our own purpose and into what our seasons have actually been building than we realize. I think that's because we've just never learned to read it as evidence. We've only learned to remember it as history. That's where a lot of tension we carry actually comes from. Not battle scars or failure or crisis, but from not understanding what our own moments have been trying to tell us. That insight has been there the entire time. We've just never known how to hear it. And to learn how to hear it, we need to take a lesson from, you guessed it, the distillery. Welcome to Craft to Clarity. I'm Steve Muscato, and I'm glad you're here. As of today, we've spent 41 episodes together talking about the tension leaders carry between what they built and what they're built for. Every episode comes back to some version of the same question. What is this season revealing, and what does it ask of me? That's not an accident. It's the only way I know to look at leadership anymore. Not as a series of decisions in a career, but as a formation, a season, a refinement, whether we're paying attention to it or not. Which got me wondering, where did that actually come from? I want to spend a few moments on that today, not as my personal biography, but as evidence. Proof that what we've been talking about isn't theoretical. It's something I had to learn to see in my own life, and maybe it can help others. I couldn't see it while I was living it, but I want to show you what it looked like once I finally could. So I've been in a lot of distilleries, modern ones, stainless steel, good lighting, a tasty room with barrels stacked up against the wall for decoration, a gift shop where you can buy a shirt or a bottle of what you liked. But when I think about distilleries, I prefer to think back to the old days of whiskey making, when it was more of a craft and less of a production run. I picture a dimly lit barn, a dirt floor that's littered with spilled grain no one's bothered to clean up because there's another batch coming tomorrow. Steam hanging in the air off the still. A man in a stained apron, hands still wet, opening a leather notebook worn soft and dark on the corners from years of handling. After each run, he writes something down. The weather that day, what the grain looked like going in, what surprised him, and what he tried differently next time. He does that season after season, run after run, for years. At some point, if you go back and read the whole thing together, instead of one entry at a time, it stops being a collection of random notes. It becomes a pattern. And that is the craft itself. This is the part that I think many of us miss with our own lives. If we just journaled at all, each day would be a single entry. This job, that conversation, this season, that mistake. Not many of us actually go back and read it as a whole. It's not that we're short on experience. We're short on the discipline of reading it as evidence instead of just remembering it as history. I never kept a notebook like that. What happened instead is that the work I'm drawn to now, talking with leaders, helping them distill what they're carrying, set me back looking. Not for stories to share, but for evidence that I missed the first time. And once I started looking, I found it everywhere. Not one clean thread, but fragments scattered across nearly 30 years that only now look like a pattern because I finally know what I'm looking for. So here's what showed up when I finally sat down to read my own notebook. Not remembered it, read it. The first thing I noticed, 18 years at one company, a growing responsibility the whole way through. Advertising, sales promotion, branding, strategy, a digital revolution that changed most of it again. Every few years, mastering something new. At some point, the tension in that role got strong enough that I had to leave. And for years, I thought it was because of a few moments that made the tension impossible to ignore. But looking back and reading it now, I think I had it backwards. The moments I thought caused me to leave was really about misalignment, and I only realized this because the examination revealed it. If I'd truly been aligned with that organization, I'd have stayed and worked through things. But I didn't, because by then I'd already outgrown what I'd built there, without fully realizing it yet. I just thought at the time that the next thing was my own marketing business. So I left. The second thing I noticed, I started my company, iBrand, and it turned out to be more than I thought it was going to be. Marketing, then strategy, then eventually sitting alongside leadership teams as a fractional CMO, not advising from the outside, but being accountable for the execution and alignment from the inside. That gave me a relationship with leaders I'd never had before. And that exposed a different tension than that 18-year job. Not, am I aligned with this organization, but something closer to, am I aligned with what I was actually built to do? iBrand still matters today because organizations carry the same tension too. The one between what they're building and what they're truly built for. iBrand is where I help with that for organizations. But now, Crafted Clarity is where I help leaders personally. Different doors, same underlying work. And the third thing I noticed, examining that pattern is what led me to start this podcast in the first place. A way to talk to leaders about that tension at scale. And it's shifting again, right now, into something closer to teaching what the examination itself and how to apply the craft of a master distiller actually looks like. So here's what the reflection and the examination all pointed to. I kept building my career, but it took reading my own notes to see that building something and being built for something are not the same thing. 29 years of not knowing the difference until after the fact is the only reason I have any business sitting across from you right now in this tasting room at all. So enough about me. What I want to spend the rest of our time on is the same tension. The one that you might be carrying right now. So let's go back to that old distiller for a second. He didn't treasure that notebook because it made him look organized. He treasured it because it's the only proof he had of his own craft. Anyone can point to a good batch and call it luck, or good grain, or a good year. Only the notebook could tell him whether it was him, whether what he was doing, season after season, was actually getting better, actually becoming something. Without the notebook, he was just a man who happened to make whiskey. But with it, he was a distiller who can prove he was mastering something. And I think that's exactly what's missing for a lot of us. Maybe your notebook begins with a company. Maybe it begins with a marriage or a divorce, a child, a mentor, an illness. A conversation you still think about 15 years later. None of those moments tell you what they actually meant or what they'd eventually reveal. They just happened, the way that they happen to everyone. And they only start meaning something once enough of them accumulate and you go back and read them together. Maybe, like me, you've never actually done that. Going beyond the what, to look for the why, to look for the pattern. Without that, you might end up like the man who makes good whiskey, but can't quite tell you why. You can say what happened. You can't always say what it revealed, what it was building in you, or why something worked. Still doesn't feel like what you were built for. That's not a flaw. It's just a discipline nobody handed to you. So let's name this directly, because I don't think it's what most people assume it is. It's not burnout or stress or just the ordinary weight of responsibility. It's not doubt about whether you're good enough. And it's not simply that you're in a hard season. Every leader has hard seasons. I think for a lot of us, it's something more specific than any of that. It's the tension of carrying evidence we've never actually read. Every promotion, every pivot, every season that stretched you, every conversation that you can't shake, it's been sitting there, the way that old distiller's earlier entries sat in the notebook before he went back and read them together. Not lost, just unread. And when you haven't had time to read your own evidence, it can be hard to tell the difference between a season that's working and a season that's actually built for something. Those two seasons can feel very similar. That gap usually shows up in small, insignificant moments. A decision here, a conversation there, a season that felt different than the others. That's what happened to me. And it's probably happened to you too, in some form, whether you've named it or not. And here's where the distiller's notebook earns its keep. Because reading the past is only half of the craft. That old distiller wasn't just flipping back through years of entries for nostalgia. He was comparing them against what was true right now. This year's grain, this season's weather. Whatever was different about the rickhouse, the barrels, the run in front of him. The notebook told him what had worked before, but it didn't tell him what to do today. That's where the patterns actually start to matter. Not on their own, but held up against what's true right now. Enough entries read together start to reveal something bigger than any season, any single season. A shape, a thread, the outline of what you're actually built for. But that only comes from holding the two together. The notebook alone just tells you what happened. It's the notebook against the current season that shines a light on your purpose and on your leadership. If the distiller only reads the notebook but ignores the grain in front of him, he'll make an inferior whiskey. A leader only reading the pattern but ignoring the season they're actually in, he can make the same mistake. I want to take a second right here, because everything I said could sound like a diagnosis, and it isn't. Tension isn't a verdict. It's an invitation. That old distiller didn't treat any one note in the notebook as a story. He treated it as information the next run needed. The tension between what the grain promised and what the barrel produced wasn't punishment. It was a process doing exactly what it's supposed to do, asking something of him before the next batch. The tension between what we built and what we're built for is doing the same thing. It's simply asking you something right now, in the season you're actually in. It's asking, what does this reveal? What gets carried forward and what gets left behind? Sometimes the honest answer is stay, but differently. Sometimes it's, this season has done what it was here to do. Either way, the tension isn't the enemy. It's the invitation to finally open the notebook instead of carrying it around unread and hoping it gets lighter on its own. It won't until you read it. That same discipline applies just as much to what you lead as it does to you. Your organization is keeping a notebook too, whether anyone's reading it or not. But that's a conversation for another day. Today is about you. If you've ever gone to a whiskey tasting, you know it doesn't end when the pour does. You sit with it. You notice it. You notice what came up and what surprised you and what you want to come back to next time. Sit with a few of these the same way. And if you want to go somewhere to actually do that, not just think about it once and move on, well, that's what the Still is. The Still is our web app where you can keep talking through whatever tension you're carrying, and it's a place to start your own version of the Distiller's Notebook. And not just to note what happened, but to recognize what's been revealing. Here are my 3 tasting notes from today. First, what have you been carrying that you never actually gone back and read? And not the story you already know how to tell, the entry underneath it, the one you've been living with instead of learning from. Sometimes it's the one you never think to write down, but it doesn't feel like an event. It just feels like you. 2, where has something been working that still doesn't feel like what you were actually built for? That gap is easy to miss because working feels like proof you're on the right track. But it isn't always. Sometimes it's just proof that the season is going fine, which is a different thing altogether. And third, what's true about the season you're in right now? The grain in front of you, not the notebook, that you haven't fully accounted for yet. Recognizing the pattern only gets you halfway. The other half is being honest about what's different this time. The temptation is to reach for the old answer because it worked before, but the conditions in front of you aren't asking for the old answer. They're asking you to notice them. So let's go back to the barn one last time. That distiller didn't treasure his notebook because it made good copy for a distillery gift shop someday. He treasured it because it was proof. The only proof he had that what he was doing was actually a craft, and that he was getting better at it. Without it, every batch stood alone. But with it, 30 years of batches became a body of work, a life. I unfortunately never had a notebook like that. But every time I've gone back and read my own years the way that he'd read his, I keep finding the same thing. Working and being built for were never the same question. Yours might be revealing something just as simple, once you actually read it instead of just remembering it. We started today talking about how much we remember and how little of it we actually recognize. Maybe that's the whole discipline right there. We remember, but master distillers learn to read. And somewhere on the other side of enough reading, they start to recognize. Maybe the tension you're carrying isn't asking you to become someone different. Maybe it's just asking you to become the kind of leader who's finally learning to read what your life has already been revealing. Thanks for joining me today. And remember, clarity isn't found, it's crafted. If today's conversation resonated with you, don't let it end here. Visit craftedclarity.net to explore more conversations, reflections, and resources designed to help you distill the tension between what you've built and what you're built for. You can explore The Still, a curated experience that helps you find the right conversation for the season you're in, learn more about leadership experiences and facilitation through the work of the distiller, or connect with me directly for a one-on-one conversation. But whatever you're navigating, you don't have to distill it alone. And remember, clarity isn't found, it's crafted.